Okay? Okay, so what we'll do by the end of today is go through an editorial, and we'll pick out the premises, we'll pick out the conclusion, we'll look for the inferences, and then we'll try to sort of begin using our first epistemic virtue, which is imagination. So imagination, cultivating the imagination, is probably the most important of the epistemic virtues. And I'll show you how that works as we go forward. Okay. Last time we saw, just to review quickly, we saw an example of an invalid argument. So I'm gonna start picking on people. Let's see, there were 2 Jacobs, there was a Noah, there was a Joshua, there was a Daniela. Is Daniela here? Do I see Daniela? I don't see Daniela. There's a Tony. Tony, tell me, what are the premises?
If it's raining, then the grass is wet.
Okay, so that's the first premise. If it's raining, then the grass is wet. We call that premise that premise has a particular form. We'll look at that going forward. It's an if-then form, right? So it's like a statement of a law of nature, or it's just a statement of what we call a conditional. And we call this form of sentences, the if-then form, we call them conditionals. If this, then this. The if this, then this conditional form is central to our reasoning. You can see how it sort of helps you move from one thing to another. So if this, then this, right? So if Topeka is north of Wichita and Wichita is north of Oklahoma City, then Topeka is north of Oklahoma City, right? We're sort of moving through with these conditional statements, these if-then statements, to being able to reason and generate new facts. So that's the first premise. The first premise of this argument is a conditional. The second premise, let's see, Noah. What's the second premise? It isn't raining, right? And then the conclusion, let's see, let's get someone from over here. How about, forgetting all names. Let's see, how about the man with, there's Daniela, you were hiding. Daniela, right? Danielle. Okay, so Danielle, what's the conclusion?
The grass isn't wet.
The grass isn't wet. Okay, so the person is trying to rationally persuade you that this is the case. Yes? They've given you 2 premises and a conclusion we've identified so far. Where's the inference? How about Joshua? Jacob. What's the inference?
Therefore.
Okay, so he says inference is therefore. So the therefore definitely marks the fact that there's a move, right? So I see that, or Jacob sees that there's a move happening here, right? Okay, what's the move? The word therefore isn't the inference. The word therefore marks the inference, as Jacobs correctly pointed out. What's the move? What's going on? How is the person reasoning here? In this case. Yes, ma'am, what's your name?
Sarah.
Sarah?
They're making an assumption.
Okay, are they making an assumption? They're not making an assumption, Sarah. So the assumptions would be like the premises, right? The things you assume to get going, yeah? The inference is the move from the assumptions to another step in the argument. In this case, the conclusion, right? So how is the move happening? Did you identify yourself last time? Was it Michael? Justin. Okay, Justin.
They reason that grass cannot be wet unless it is raining.
Okay, good. We're beginning to unpack the move. So one more time, Justin.
They reason that grass cannot be wet unless it is raining.
Okay, maybe this is what Sarah meant by an assumption then. You want to chime in, Sarah?
Maybe like a non-sequitur?
Well, a non sequitur is an inference that doesn't follow. It's a move that is a broken move, right? Like, you know, if we say, you know, Harry is ugly, therefore Harry is wise. That doesn't follow. That's a non sequitur, okay? This is an inference. It's a bad inference. It's, in that sense, maybe a non sequitur. It's broken, right, Sarah? It's a broken inference for sure. Let's take a look at the bits and pieces of the argument. So we see that there are these two premises. We see that there's a conclusion. The grass isn't wet, right? We see the structure of the argument works like this. We've got these two premises. Then we've got this move marked by the therefore, as Jacob pointed out, right? And then we've got this conclusion, the grass isn't wet. Sarah said, well, maybe this is a non sequitur. Maybe this doesn't follow. It's sort of like if Harry's ugly, therefore Harry's wise. That doesn't follow. So maybe this doesn't follow too. You're kind of right. Invalid arguments are sort of like non sequiturs, right? Okay. So how does the move happen, allegedly? It says, if it's raining, then the grass is wet. And it isn't raining. So if I plug that fact into the beginning of the conditional, then I conclude the grass isn't wet. Now that's illegal, it turns out. It's illegal. But what they're trying to do is they're putting together the first two premises and claiming that when you put together the first two premises, this conclusion must follow. We know from last time that it doesn't follow because we were talking a lot about counterexamples, right? We gave a whole bunch of counterexamples. We said, this doesn't have to follow from these two. Why? Because we can imagine counterexamples, right? The counterexample is the grass is wet. Now let's imagine scenarios in which the first two premises are true and the denial of the conclusion is also true. The denial of the grass isn't wet is, what's your name?
Garrett.
Garrett. What's the denial of the grass isn't wet?
What do you mean?
If you deny the grass isn't wet, then you assert the grass
Dry.
is wet.
Okay.
Isn't wet means dry,
Yeah.
right? So if you assert that the grass isn't wet, and then someone denies what you're saying, they are asserting that the grass is dry. Under what circumstances could it be that these two premises would be true and the grass is wet? The circumstances in which it would be true would be, for example, not Noah. Noah's over there. Not Joshua, right? Not Michael. What is it? What's your name? Cicada? Sorry, one more time?
K-A-D-E.
Cade. Cade, go for it.
It could be a sprinkler where you're just watering.
Exactly, right? It's not raining. The grass is wet. Why? Because there's a sprinkler running, right? That would be a counterexample. Now, how did he get that? He got that by either memory in this case, or an active imagination, right? So you had to imagine a way that this could be true and this could be false. In arguments that are valid arguments, you won't be able to do that. In an argument that's a valid argument, you will not be able to imagine the denial of the conclusion and the truth of the premises. You won't be able to come up with a counterexample. Okay? So imagination is a good way to check, just intuitively, like, could this person be wrong? What would the world be like if they were wrong? And if you can come up with a coherent story as to how the world would be like if they were wrong, then guess what? What they say doesn't follow validly. Okay? So cultivation of the imagination, which we'll see going forward, is critically important. It's really easy to do, by the way. It's really easy to, you might be like, well, I'm not the imaginative type. I'm not into poetry or the arts or anything like that. I don't have good imagination. You can cultivate imagination very easily. Okay? And the way you cultivate imagination very easily is by denying, by negating, and then thinking about the negation. So